Japan has a reputation for a rigid work culture and its economy stagnated for 2 decades. Now, a growing number of entrepreneurial millennials are bypassing the corporate world to forge business success. And now on BBC World News, Mariko meets some of them, jump-starting Japan.
Shoulder to shoulder, taking steps all in sync, working in unison. This is an ancient ritual that started in the early 17th century. Hundreds parade through the streets of Tokyo. I grew up here and I have fond memories of these local festivals as a child. Kids are taught the importance of being a team player early on. Carrying a mikoshi or a shrine is a lot harder than it looks. If one person doesn't shoulder their share of the weight, the others could get injured. It's this kind of unity that shapes today's Japan, where everyone has a defined role in the community.
This festival celebrates Japan's successes and prosperity. But as the country faces stagnation, we look at how Japan is going to jumpstart its economy.
We meet young entrepreneurs, all under the age of 30, who have decided to bypass the rigid corporate world to create their own success.
Japan, up to now, has really been really anti-entrepreneur. I would remember that even maybe 5-6 years ago, that entrepreneur might have even been a bad word.
The startup rate in Japan has halved from its heyday of the 1980s and is now the lowest among developed economies. Can the young entrepreneurs bring back the good times? Morning rush hour. An army of Japan's salaried workers making their way to their office. For decades, they've been the backbone of this country's stellar economic progress. They make up 90% of the working population. 28-year-old Kodai Kawase used to be one of them, a paid employee at a social media company. But today, he's a rare breed here, an entrepreneur. 3 years ago, he and his friends decided to start their own company. With most of their employees older than them, it's very unusual in this hierarchical society.
We were all quite young, still in our 20s, when we started our firm. So we meet every week to discuss how we should approach our older staff or what kind of corporate culture we want to create to manage things better. I wanted to create a new product. I wanted to be an inventor. Because we went from being a salaryman to an entrepreneur. We didn't have much money to manufacture things. We started as a group of 6, but needed more manpower. From people to materials to knowledge and money. We were lacking in all of them.
This is his winning idea, a lock that can be controlled by smart devices. But it wasn't a product he thought he could build a company on.
It started when I was talking to my friends about how inconvenient keys were. For example, when we lose it, or when we want to give it to a family or a girlfriend. Everything else is becoming digital. So why can't we make keys more digital? We didn't make prototypes thinking we'd start a company. We were getting together on weekends or after work, just as a hobby.
But within 3 years, the hobby turned into a company that's valued at several $1 million, growing from 6 to more than 50 staff. It's now used in not just offices, but also shared accommodation.
じゃあ昨日のセールスメンバーの受注報告になります。まず自分ですね。昨日は2社5台、の受注になりました。
ウェブ関連のお客様で新拠点の移転に伴ってアケルンプロを導入申し込みしていただきました。
はい、では史上最年少初受注素晴らしいおめでとう。
Even though we weren't planning to mass produce it, when our friend wrote it up for a newspaper, we had over 100 inquiries. Now, we are seeing sales growth of 10 to 20% every month.
So this is how the product works. If I book a room with one of Kawase-san's clients, I download the app, I then get sent a code, and all I have to do is this to gain access. So my phone essentially becomes the key during my stay, and when I check out, the code expires. So the owner and I actually don't even have to meet.
Kawase-san's success benefited from government's funding. This federal agency was tasked to boost the number of startups, but there have been few takers and even fewer successes.
すごく伸びそうだけど、今ここをつながないとっていう部分に出すっていうのがやっぱり我々の基本的なスタンスですので。
Japan, up to now, has really been really anti-entrepreneur. I would remember that even maybe 5-6 years ago, that entrepreneur might have even been a bad word. But we've actually, to give it credit, come a long ways. Yet we still have a long ways to go.
William Saito is a serial entrepreneur himself. Having had experiences of many startup firms, he's been brought in to advise the government. He says Japan needs to act now to revive its innovation spirit.
One of the cultural issues here is that we have such a developed country. Why take the risk that you could become a, as they call, salaryman here, get a nice stable job, lifetime employment. But what's, I think, changed definitely in the last few years is this concept of lifetime employment. That is becoming more and more a myth, and that people are beginning to see that. So I think we see a fundamental shift that people are becoming to recognize.
But the shift has been slow, because for the last 2 decades, Japan has been living on its past glories. Just like the conveyor belt sushi bar, Japanese innovations such as the Walkman made their way across the world. But Japan hasn't managed to come up with a killer product since then.
Well, this restaurant has been around for 40 years. It was, in fact, one of the first to adopt the conveyor belt system. But even now, it's having to invent a new dish every month, like this one, Belly Salmon Avocado Special. It's this kind of innovation spirit that the government is encouraging corporate Japan to have.
But it's easier said than done. Most young people here don't think becoming an entrepreneur is a good career option. Because in a society which values status, they prefer to work for established firms instead of what are known as no-name companies.
A majority of the parents still feel that they would be rest assured that their kids got a good job and that they'd be secure for the rest of their lives. I think it's still quite the minority that the parents would be understanding for their kids to take a no-name job. And it could be as petty as, what do I tell the other moms? Or what do I tell the other parents?
That was one of the challenges that Shoko Takahashi felt when she started her own company.
なんか絶対驚くと思ったんで
I knew my parents would be surprised to hear that I wanted to start my own company. I thought they'd probably object to it, so I didn't tell them for 6 months after I founded Gene Quest.
And that's not all. She's in a controversial industry, analyzing people's DNA. Less than 1% of Japan's population has had their DNA tested in the hope that they might find out what kind of illnesses they may develop in the future. It means almost everyone in Japan is her potential customer.
I always wanted to continue my research after graduation, but so few people have been tested in Japan, so there's not enough data to analyze. That's when I realized that by starting a company to get more people to analyze their DNA, I'd be able to collect more data. It's a win-win.
So this is the kit that you'll receive at home. It costs $500 US, and you'll get the result in about 4 to 6 weeks. じゃあこれをお家で受け取った時どうすればいいんですか？
はい、この中に唾液採取キットが入ってまして、ここに唾液を入れていただくっていう形になります。でこの中には試薬が入ってまして。でここに入ってる試薬と唾液を混ぜることで、 DNA の分解を防ぐっていう形になってます。
So I'm going to get tested and send in my saliva, but she's warned me that because of my pregnancy, the result might not be 100% accurate.
But experts say there's no proof of its effectiveness to predict future illness.
Because it's DNA, customers tend to think that the results are 100% accurate. Maybe they're influenced by American dramas. But there are still many things we don't know. You could end up with two very different results if you use different companies.
When you're doing something new, there's bound to be mixed reception. If there isn't, it means we're not experimenting enough. So I think some level of criticism is unavoidable.
Do you feel that you face discrimination because of your age and your gender?
I sometimes get treated like, what is this young woman doing? But as a result, people remember me more. So being a young female CEO isn't just a disadvantage.
Kathy Matsui knows all about the challenges of being a woman in Japan's male-dominated society. She's been pushing for womenomics, policy to utilize more female workforce.
It wasn't that long ago that in Japan, if you were a single female, for instance, it was really difficult just to take out a mortgage. And that was despite the fact that you had a, professional level, full-time career, but it was just because you were single, you were kind of regarded as maybe higher credit risk versus your male colleagues or counterparts. So the good news is I think that mindset has definitely begun to change because now the financial institutions are realizing, hey, there's a big potential credit market out there. They are female, some may be single, some may be entrepreneurs, and we need to tap into that market.
At this networking event of startups, Shoko stands out. Despite the government's efforts to support female entrepreneurs, only 10% are women. Shoko has managed to ignore critics. But that's something most women here still don't feel comfortable doing in this male-dominated society.
I commanded the deployment surface force for counter-piracy enforcement of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, implementing anti-piracy measures in the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf is a major shipping route linking Europe and Asia, and has been subject to frequent piracy attacks in recent years. The Japan Self-Defense Forces have been escorting civilian vessels from various countries through the Gulf of Aden since 2009. We cooperate with many naval units from related countries, enhancing deterrence. We are dedicated to maintaining peace and order in the Gulf as we work with the global community to continue our mission.
The farmland of Japan. Agriculture is an industry that's been hit by a shrinking and aging population. Here, every innovation counts. 28-year-old Lisa Kikuchi and her young colleagues have driven 2 hours out of Tokyo to introduce smart farming to their clients. She's the chief executive of a small startup, SenseProud.
It's a sensor that's connected to the internet that measures soil moisture and the ground level temperature. So a farmer will be able to understand what's going on in the soil from their house, from when they're even traveling abroad. And the next step is we're planning to develop a software that the farmers can use to automatically control the water and in the near future, the fertilizer as well.
This kind of new ideas is what the government wants to encourage in this industry to make up for a labor shortage.
We got 3 years of funding from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. We still need the support from the government because it's not something that can become profitable overnight. First of all, we have to wait for the plants to grow to get the experiment results.
I caught up with Lisa over lunch. It was a big gamble for her to join this startup because only a few years ago she was a high-flying consultant for McKinsey. But she's ditched a corporate suit to follow her childhood passion.
Were your parents surprised that you joined a startup?
Well, my other choice instead of joining McKinsey was another startup, a software startup. So they knew that I would, end up going to a startup.
How about farmers? I mean, do they get surprised when they see you as a young woman?
So they know that, we're a team of young people.
Yeah.
The farmers in 30s and 40s, they tend to accept us.
Explaining the benefit of the technology is a big part of her job. She says that the younger generation of farmers are more open to new ideas, but it's still a hard sell. She also depends on recommendations from existing clients like Yosuke Tamatsukuri. The sensors have allowed him to be more efficient.
We used to rely on our gut feeling and instinct about how much water to give, but there was no way of finding out how accurate we were. That's why a product like this is very useful.
We're not going to be the evangelists of, the technology itself, so we cannot sell them or teach them how to use smartphones. But so we're currently targeting the younger generation of farmers. They don't right away understand how it would benefit them. So it's our job to really make it into a service that's easy to use and easy to understand and really beneficial to the farmers.
Until recently, these sensors have been rented out for free. Today, SenseSprout has several customers who pay $1,000 per sensor. But it meant a big pay cut for Lisa to have left McKinsey.
Financial-wise, I get enough money to support myself, so it's okay. And I try not to think about what if I stay there, so that's not a problem. I'm still trying to figure out the way of how startups go, so I'm still learning, but it's a series of interesting challenges, I think.
Lisa is confident of growing SenseSprout not just domestically but overseas as well. The government wants to see more young people taking a riskier path to success. But convincing them is a challenge. Education is partly to blame. Japanese children making their way to a neighborhood school. They may not be in uniform, but in the classroom it's different. There, they're taught to conform.
Well, growing up here, the education that I received was very, very rigid, and it still is. Even as a child, you're taught to follow rules, strive for perfection, and failure is not an option. So I can understand why many young Japanese people who receive the same education as me may be afraid to take risks.
But what if you don't excel in school? That's what happened to 29-year-old Kentaro Yoshifuji, the founder of Ori Laboratory.
For 3.5 years from when I was 10, I couldn't go to school because of illness. I felt so helpless and unbearably lonely. I started wondering, if I had a healthy clone, could it make better memories at school instead of me? That was the beginning of wanting to create my avatar.
He now spends most weekends fine-tuning his creation, a robot that addresses that loneliness he felt as a child. Kentaro could have easily been left out of the system, but his teacher introduced him to engineering, and his dreams started in his garage.
My first prototype was a walking robot, and I made it in 2010. But it wasn't really practical, and I wondered if people would pay for it. I didn't know how to get feedback or money. That was tough.
But that all changed after he won a massive prize at an innovation competition. The idea is the robot can be at places where its users can't be, like in the case of one of his paralyzed staff, Yuta Banda. He works from hospital bed using only his chin to communicate through his avatar in the office.
そこにカメラがついていてスピーカーとマイクが入ってる。
目の間のここがカメラになってるんですよね。
こう見ていてここにも映ってるわけですよね。
It's only been a year since this product was launched, and it's already making waves.
インターネットなんでね、地球の裏側からでも同じように見て喋ることができます。
じゃあこれで出張中とかに、
そう仲間たちに指示を出したりとか。
So there are 120 units that have been rented out across Japan, and they're thinking of exporting it as well.
Because of his experience as a lonely child, Kentaro has made it his mission to help others who are also left out of the society. He's trying to help people with motor neuron diseases like ALS. 30-year-old Masatane Muto has already lost most of the mobility of his limbs and accepts that it's a matter of time before he's bedbound.
3年半前に
I was diagnosed with ALS 3.5 years ago. I learned that even when I lose all my other muscles, my eyeballs would be able to move. So I want to prepare myself by learning different tools to communicate. I want to continue participating in the society.
It's great to see my product being used, being told it's useful. But more than that, I feel like we're making the impossible possible.
Kentaro's innovation has given bedbound people the ability to be part of the workforce. From an awkward child, Kentaro has regained his confidence and found his own success. But it's not been an easy path.
All problems right now that we experience in Japan are education related. We create a culture that is around perfection, and that we have to be perfect, that we can't lose face, that failure is a bad word. These things we're trying to change, but a lot of this is rooted even as early as kindergarten, where you don't challenge authority. You're not supposed to fail. You're supposed to stay on the straight path. Parents are now beginning to realize that this is not necessarily the way the rest of the world works. And so these parents understand and are much more forgiving, but still in the minority.
Changing the mindset of the next generation. All seats at this Young Inventors class have been taken up. Here, the children are encouraged to make things and to think out of the box. The teachers are retired engineers and they're volunteers. These weekend classes are taking place all over Japan. Many are part of the government initiative in the hope of creating the next generation of innovators.
The government is definitely trying, but any government, not just the Japanese government, is not very good at picking innovation. The government here is trying to do various structural modifications so that it allows for better safety nets, for people to take risks, to study overseas, to understand other cultures and so on. These take time, but it's ironic that a lot of these people who are probably the least entrepreneurial are trying to create that environment.
As Japan tries to bring back the glory days, it needs to address many cultural and societal issues that are deeply entrenched. Subtle sexism, lack of parental support, smarter technology, and attitudes towards risk-taking and the fear of failure.
Not many entrepreneurs can be successful the first time around. We need to learn from our mistakes and failures. But in Japan, once you fail, you struggle to get investment. I have many friends like that. So Japan needs to become more forgiving of failures.
As the rest of corporate Japan goes home, young inventors are still dreaming big. Kawase-san already has plans to list his company. The sign on his wall says, "Never miss a good opportunity." Perhaps a timely reminder for Japan not to ignore the small group of risk takers as it tries to jumpstart its economy.